Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gloria of Gloria's Knits, and today will be podcast number 3. So hope you guys enjoy. We'll be going through the typical what I'm wearing, finished objects, works in progresses, and last but not least, plans and acquisitions. So if that's something you'll enjoy, make sure you subscribe to my channel and join our little knitting community here. And let's just jump right into today's video. Okay, so first off, let's talk about my what I'm wearing today, which is also a finished object, kind of the second time around, because I did have to do a little bit of fixing for this. So in my last podcast, I mentioned how I wanted to fix the neckline of this, and this is the Petite knit slipover, Stockholm slipover V-neck. So it's a pattern that I've knitted 3 times now. This is my second version of it. And in my podcast number 1, I talked about my third version, which is a textured kind of version of the Stockholm slipover, but this one is just the plain stockinette. I wanted to fix the neckline in my last podcast episode because it was really like stretched out. As you can see right now, I've literally taken apart the neckline and undid every single stitch of the tubular bind off and then redid it, bound off in a little bit of a tighter fashion so that I wouldn't be as like stretched out and droopy. And I think I really kind of succeeded in how this looks now. It looks very like not too enlarged at the front, and it kind of matches with like the armhole. It's a little bit like less deep compared to the armhole. The armhole goes a little further down versus the neckline kind of stops like right here, which I like. I didn't really want the V to be like too deep, and I think this really matches well with like a nice white t-shirt or a white long sleeve underneath. This is definitely like my go-to look. I really like styling slipovers. I think it's just so convenient, so practical, and really fits with my everyday kind of wardrobe. It keeps my core warm, but my arms are kind of like free to move around, and it doesn't hinder any of my like movements. And yeah, I just really like slipovers. In terms of pattern wise, this was really easy to knit. I mean, that's why I've knit it 3 times. You start off with a back panel, you do a bit of like increases for the armhole, you knit all the way down to the armhole, and then you switch over and start picking up stitches for each of the shoulders to do the front placket. And then you join at the base of the V, and then you knit in the round until the length you're happy with. And then you do some 1x1 ribbing at the edge of the body and also along the armholes and V neckline. So yeah, pretty simple. Not a lot of kind of really complex techniques. There are a little bit of short rows that you have to do for like at the very top right here. But for the most part, I think it was really easy to understand, and I would definitely knit it again, maybe for my 4th one. Uses not too much yarn, so it's also great. You don't have to knit sleeves, you don't have to do any magic loop, you don't have to do any of that, and it's just like perfect. So in terms of yarn, I did use the Petite's wool worsted yarn, which is a worsted weight yarn. I used 4.5mm needles for the body, and then I went down to 4mm for the ribbing and the like the ribbing at the body, and then the ribbing on the armholes and neckline. So really simple. I used about 2.5 balls of yarn. And after redoing the neckline the second time, I'm a lot happier with it. I think I will wear a lot more. And yeah, I don't have much else to say about this one because it was pretty easy. I'm sure most of you have clicked onto this video to see my second finished object, which is my Eva cardigan. So let me just grab that. So this is my finished Eva cardigan. I'll obviously put some B-roll footage of me wearing this, but I've essentially finished the entire cardigan along with adding on the buttons. So last time I showed you guys this, I just split for sleeves and was starting to work on the body. I had maybe like 1/2 inch of the body. So since then, I've finished both the sleeves. I did the long button band, which is 2x2 rib. I've sewed on buttons, and I did the ribbing at the base of the body. So I did a lot in these past 2 weeks. I think I finished this project in about 3 weeks, which is really fast for a cardigan. There was a lot of purling, definitely hurt my hands. And yeah, I have a lot to say about this one. I won't go over too in depth about kind of the top portion of the cardigan because I talked about that in my last episode. But just a brief recap on what this pattern entails is it is a DK weight set in sleeve oversized cardigan by Petite Knit. It's called the Eva Cardigan, as you guys all may know. And one of the key features about this cardigan is that it has a really cool set in shoulder sleeve design along with the 2x2 accent ribbing for the cuffs, the button band, and the bottom ribbing. So that's just a little recap of what this pattern is. And in terms of how you start it and like different techniques you need to know, it's mainly just everything is in stockinette or 2x2 ribbing. You start off with the back panel here. You do some shaping and increases for these shoulders, and then you break the yarn and you start picking up for these shoulder panels that you do on either side, just to kind of create the illusion of a set-in sleeve. And then you pick up stitches to join it all together, along with like increasing for the sleeve opening and also the raglan increase. And then you eventually put your sleeve stitches on hold, and then you just continue working on the body in stockinette until the length that you desire. And then you switch over to 2x2 ribbing and you pick up sleeves and do the same thing. What I found really interesting with this pattern is the shoulder construction. Obviously, that's the main reason as to why I picked this pattern, because of it wasn't going to be too like drop shoulder or like a saddle shoulder or like a raglan shoulder. I don't know if you call raglan cardigans also a raglan shoulder. I'm not sure. But anyway, I really wanted kind of a more fitted cardigan that would be along my shoulder and not just like being really like overly off of my shoulder, if you guys know what I mean. But yeah, I picked this because of the shoulder construction, and then also for the really unique 2x2 ribbing and how thick it was. As you can tell with this button band, like this ribbing is very, very big. Usually my ribbing would be like half the size of that. So it makes the buttons kind of look very small compared to the ribbing. And I really like the look of that. I did have some struggles with this pattern after I have last talked to you guys. So it was pretty smooth when I was just doing the increases for the sleeve and the raglan. So essentially the top portion of the cardigan was perfectly fine. I didn't have any issues with it. I did a gauge swatch and it was pretty close, I would say, to the gauge that the pattern suggested. I think it was about like 20 stitches per like 30 rows or something like that. But you're supposed to use a DK weight yarn. That's the suggested yarn thickness. And in the pattern, it does suggest using Pure Gint, which is by Sandnes Garn. I obviously did not use that yarn. I decided to use some yarn that I got back from Korea from one of my travels, and it was a fingering weight wool, very rustic yarn that I held double. And what I thought was using 4.5 millimeter needles, which is what I said on my last podcast. So I did the body on what I thought was 4.5 millimeters. And then at the end, when I was switching over to do the ribbing, that was where the first problem arose. And when I switched needles, I'm like, wait, I think I was actually using 5 millimeter needles. So I was really surprised as to why I had to kind of tension my yarn so tightly for these needles in order to reach gauge. And it's because I was literally up 2 needle sizes. So the pattern suggests using 4 millimeter. I thought I was using 4.5 so that it wouldn't be so like dense of a fabric, but instead I was using 5 millimeter needles. So that's why I had to like pull so tightly, and I felt like the knitting experience with this yarn was just not all that enjoyable. The yarn was not very bouncy or stretchy. It was like, it felt like it was cutting into my finger, and it was so just rustic. Obviously, by the time I blocked it, washed it, it bloomed very nicely. It softened up a lot. It's still a little bit rustic, but it's not to the point where I feel like my fingers are getting paper cuts every time I was knitting on this. So that was problem number one. Since I was on 5mm needles, I did not feel the need to drop down to the suggested needle size for the ribbing because that would have been way too tight. So I only went down to, I think, about 4mm for the ribbing, for the 2x2 ribbing on the body, the sleeve cuffs, and also the button band. So that was one modification I did. Another modification I did is actually how I knitted up the sleeve. So as you can see, the depth of the top portion of this cardigan is very, very deep. So by the time I split for sleeves, it kind of felt like it was near like my belly button. So it wasn't very close to my armpit. It was very low. So obviously that meant there were a lot of stitches for the sleeves. And given my gauge was a little bit off and my needle size was just like quite big, I decided to decrease at a different rate than what the pattern suggested. And, ideally I should have figured this out at the very beginning before I started knitting the sleeves, but no, I knitted an entire sleeve all the way down to right before starting the ribbing for the cuff. And when I tried it on, it was humongous, like actually comically big. So I could not have the sleeve looking like this. I don't want to give away too much of the pattern and talk about like the rate of decrease or how many decreases are in the pattern for the size that I knitted. Unfortunately, it seems like my audio just stopped working for the remaining of the video, so I'm just re-recording this. So hopefully, it still flows. But I do recall talking about how my sleeves were having issues. The size that I did knit is the size extra small, which is the second smallest size in the Petite knit pattern for the Eva cardigan. And yeah, I just did a lot more decreases compared to what the pattern suggested. So therefore my sleeves are a lot more tapered and the cuffs were not incredibly large. As you can see, like compared to my actual wrist, it's still like bigger. There's like some ease to it, so it's not like completely cinched into my wrist, but I just didn't want it to be really, really large and baggy at the bottom because it's just really impractical for me to do my day-to-day tasks. I didn't want things to get caught on the sleeve. I wanted to be able to like move my arms and have that flexibility in terms of wearing my cardigan and not just like knocking things down, that sort of thing. So yeah, I did a lot more decreases and at a much faster rate. I believe I did something like every 5 or 6 rows, I decreased 2 stitches, so one on either side. I just made sure that the stitch count at the end worked out for the 2x2 ribbing because they do have to be multiples of 4. So yeah, just keep that in mind when you are decreasing your sleeve. I think I do quite like the look of this taper. I did an even taper of the sleeve, and yeah, I think it looks perfectly fine. Although I probably would have been happier if I knit the sleeve only once, but instead I knit one of the sleeves twice and then the other sleeve once. So yeah, it is a little bit annoying, but not enough for me to never do this pattern again. So it's really helpful for me to actually write down these notes for each of these projects so that I kind of can reference back to it in the future if I were to knit it again with a similar gauge. Obviously, if I use different yarns, then maybe it might not be as applicable, but I think it's still okay. So yeah, that was one issue that I faced. Another issue that I also encountered is the button band. So as you can see, after blocking, it looks quite nice. It looks even. I don't think I had too much issue binding off the 2x2 rib button band, but my issue was that I bound it off way too tightly. So I used the same needle size as what I knit the button band in, which was a 4mm needle, and I just bound off, not in pattern, so I didn't do like binding off in knit stitch and then purl stitch, knit stitch, purl stitch. No, I didn't do that. I just did everything knit as the pattern suggested, and I think it's just way too tight of a bind off. I don't think I was particularly trying to bind off very tightly, but I think just because of the needle size, it ultimately made the cardigan get scrunched up, which was really annoying because I had to very, very aggressively block it out, and I had to pin it down, which I don't normally have to do that with any of my other finished garments in the past that I had to wash and block. So this is the first time I had to do that, and yeah, I found it a little annoying having to block it out. After the first time that I pinned it down, it still didn't block out to the right dimensions. The front kind of pulled up a lot more because of the very tight button band bound off compared to the back. So the back was a lot lower and then the front was higher. And it just looked very like odd given how much positive ease this cardigan actually had. So it looked just like not proportionate. So I had to block it again. So this time I did more like a steam block. So I pinned it down and I steamed it, and then I let it like slowly dry after that. And then at that point, the neckline and over here kind of blocked out a bit better, and it was laying a bit more flat so that now it is more just even though like when I wear it, it still rises up a little bit at the front, but I think that's like the best I could do with this button band. I don't really want to undo the button band if I don't have to, because I did already weave in the ends. I've sewed on the buttons. I don't really want to go through the whole hassle of taking apart this bind off. I know it's a lot easier compared to a tubular bind off. I don't have to pick each stitch to undo it, but I still have to, you know, get all the stitches back onto the needle and then bound off in a bigger needle size, most likely up half a needle. I think if I went up to like a 4.5 millimeter, it would be a lot better. And it would have more stretch because I feel like I've pulled and tugged on this as max as I could. And, you know, like I was scared the yarn would literally snap. And if it snapped, then that's a completely different issue and I would most definitely have to fix it. But because it's okay for now, I think, you know, it's fine. And plus I do plan on wearing this cardigan mainly buttoned up. I think I like the look of it as more just like a sweater as opposed to like an open cardigan. I think that's just usually my style. But I do like the flexibility of having a deeper neckline so it's not as hot because this fabric is quite thick and dense. So if I were to make this in a pullover, I think it might irritate my neck a little bit if it's more like higher collar. And also I think, you know, cardigans are a bit more versatile if you plan on wearing it open or closed depending on your like mood. But yeah, for me, I think I'm just gonna wear it closed, also because it's just way too cropped. The third problem I want to talk about is actually the length of this cardigan. Because the cardigan is actually quite oversized, I was thinking that it would be a good idea to not make it as long as what the pattern suggested. So I cropped it by about 2 inches unintentionally. I think I was planning on just cropping it by like an inch, but what I didn't realize was that the ribbing that it suggested was 3.5 inches, and I think that was a little too long for me. So by the time I was doing the ribbing, I only did 3 inches. So I shortened the body by like an inch-ish, and then I shortened the ribbing by half an inch, and then ultimately it kind of ended up being like almost 2 inches shorter than what is recommended. Width-wise, it is fine. It's very oversized. I don't mind it. But lengthwise, I think it's just a tad too short. In obviously my B-roll footage, you would have seen that it does cover like the top of my high-waisted pants perfectly fine, so it's not like skin is showing. But I think when I like raise my arms or anything like that, it does get a little annoying because you can see the shirt that's underneath my cardigan if it's not tucked in, or if it's a crop top underneath, then you would just literally see skin. So yeah, if I were to make it again, definitely would add 1 inch or more to the body so that it's just a bit more long. But you know, there are benefits to having a cropped cardigan because obviously with such a big oversized like garment, it does feel pretty hot because there's so much extra fabric. So if there was extra fabric on the width of the garment and then also on the length, I think overall it would just feel like I'm wearing a full-on blanket. So that was kind of my rationale with it. Although, like I said, if I were to knit it again, I think I would add 1 extra inch. I would double check my needle size before starting. Make sure that, you know, I hit gauge or at least close to it, which I did. So that was not too big of an issue. But yeah, and also kind of calculate my sleeve decreases before I start the sleeve so that I don't make extra work for myself. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of the Eva cardigan. So let's move on to works in progress. In my last podcast, I did talk about how I wanted to cast on another sweater with the new yarn that I purchased at Michael's, which is the Patton's wool worsted in kind of like this brownish gray color. So I have my yarn here. It's caked up in a ball, but obviously it's kind of reaching the end of the ball, so it's sort of looking a little floppy. So yeah, I did cast on a new project, and I decided to go with the Just sweater, which is a free pattern on Ravelry. It is I believe a worsted weight or Aran weight sweater that is a pullover with just stockinette for the body. It has a folded over collar in 1x1 rib, and then all the cuffs and the body hem is also in 1x1 rib. So very straightforward, oversized, drop shoulder construction pattern. I believe it's pretty easy to follow. When I quickly took a glance at it, I didn't think there was anything that was like a little off or difficult in terms of the pattern, but I did have to, take some time to get used to the pattern writing style because I'm used to kind of more petite knits, and my favorite thing's knitwear writing style. So yeah, it took me a bit of time to get used to how they were writing. Another thing to point out with this pattern is that all their paid patterns for this designer, I think it's Unico. She's a Korean designer. I think all of her paid patterns are now unavailable on Ravelry. So it could be that she like rebranded to a different account. After doing a little bit of digging, I'm not sure if I'm like 100% correct, but I think her like new username is like Soop Knits on Instagram, and I also believe Ravelry, because I did see this sweater posted on that Instagram account, and that designer, her name is Manmi Choi. So like I said, Korean knitwear designer. I really like her designs. Some of her cable patterns are really pretty, and I do want to eventually maybe try it out, but that's a topic for the future. But for now, I wanted to try out this free pattern. Because it's free, I think that's why it's still available on her Ravelry page, despite all the other patterns like they got taken down. So this is what I have right now. I literally just connected the two front panels to kind of start knitting flat, but the back yoke is done. Ooh, it looks like such a mess with all these different pieces going everywhere. But yeah, I have the back yoke already knitted to the length that's suggested in the pattern. I think it's about like 8-ish inches. I'm knitting the smallest size. I really like kind of the stitch definition of this yarn, essentially. So very easy to follow. Because I didn't do a gauge swatch, I'm hoping that once it blocks out, it'll be fine, because I've used this yarn so many times already. Like I said, it's the Patton's wool worsted. I have this Slipover knitted in the same exact yarn, obviously a different color. This is a brown color versus this is more like a dark gray. I really like my neutrals, which is why I keep kind of leaning towards these types of colors for the types of garments that I like to knit. So yeah, a little bit about this pattern. Like I said, it's drop shoulder. There's a few German short rows, like just a little bit, so it's not too difficult. There's some German short rows to kind of raise the back neck, so a little bit back there. And then also for each of the shoulder panels that you have to knit forward, that has a little bit of short rows as well. I think my short rows are pretty neat. I don't see any like obvious holes or anything like that. And yeah, I think this is a pretty well written pattern. I'm hoping that after I do a bit more of the body, maybe when I finish this ball of yarn, I might do the collar and see how that looks. But I think for now, this is pretty good progress. I love a good stockinette pattern to follow. It's really easy, mindless, and just like the perfect kind of knitting project to have when you're just watching TV or doing something that doesn't require your like full attention. Because if I were to follow charts, that's obviously a lot harder compared to if I'm just knitting flat or in the round. I also chose a pullover instead of a cardigan because I'm just like, I'm tired of purling. Even right now when I'm doing the purl rows, I'm a little bit like just over it. So I can't wait to connect in the round so I can just knit, knit, knit and not do any purls. So yeah, that's the plan with this one. I don't have too much more to say about it, but yeah, very easy to knit this, and I love the yarn. It's super bouncy, it's squishy, it's not super, super scratchy like the Korean yarn that I used. So after this blocks as well, it would soften up even more. So I'm really excited about it. But for now, I'm really enjoying the knitting experience with this yarn. It's just so refreshing to have yarn that's not cutting into my finger, and that feels quite nice, but also is still wool, so I can do my spit splicing when I'm connecting balls. The only benefit with the last yarn that I used, the Korean rusk yarn, is that they came in these 200-gram cones. So fingering weight 200 grams, I held the 2 strands double, so I literally did not have to connect any like yarn at all. It felt like I was mainly just knitting, knitting, knitting. I had to weave in a few ends, obviously, because like as per the pattern, you break the yarn at certain parts when you're, you know, picking up sleeves, when you're picking up stitches for like the shoulder, for example, or when you start knitting the button band, you join a new piece of yarn. So I did have to weave in some ends, but it wasn't too bad, and it did make the experience better that the yarn was just connected in a very large quantity compared to if I were to knit with, you know, very small balls of like knitting for olive, fingering merino, like something like that, where it's 50-gram balls, you have to join like 12 balls, and it's too annoying. So I really like how this Patton's wool worsted yarn is in 100-gram skeins, so very easy to, you know, knit mindlessly and not have to worry about joining your yarns. That is my work in progress. I do have other 2 works in progresses that I've not touched since the last time I talked to you guys in the other knitting podcast, so I don't want to kind of bring it up in today's video. But in terms of plans and acquisitions, I do plan on working on my blue wave cardigan. So I'm trying to put this out there so that I will be held accountable, but I want to work on the blue wave cardigan and maybe complete 1 sleeve before the next time that I talk to you guys in my next knitting podcast. So hoping to work on both the Just sweater and also the blue wave cardigan so that I can just work kind of simultaneously on both of them. I know I'm going to kind of favor working on the Just sweater just because it's going to be easy. It's going to be in the round. I probably wouldn't even have reached the ribbing yet, so I think it would just be like a lot of mindless knitting, which is my favorite. Versus doing the sleeve, it will have to be on magic loop, and there's also some cabling and lace work involved in the sleeve. So yeah, I think that will take a bit more work, but I think that's okay. So yeah, that's my plan for the next 2 weeks before I talk to you guys again, and hopefully I will achieve that goal. I do have some socks on the needles as well. I don't know if I'm going to work on that. I'm never too big on sock knitting, but I casted those on because I wanted a small travel project when I'm just like commuting. But you know, recently I found I haven't been knitting too much while I'm commuting. It's like a little bit too crowded for me to actually knit. So yeah, I just end up favoring my bigger projects, which are more fun and on bigger needles. Also not on DPNs because I'm knitting those socks on DPNs, which is a little bit of a pain, but that's okay. It's a small project that I can have on the go if I ever need it, and with some really bright yarn, so I'm excited about it. I think that's pretty much it for today's knitting podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and thank you so much for watching. Comment down below if you have any questions regarding the projects that I talked about today, or if you just want to share something about your knitting journey. I would love to know. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.